Okay, let's begin. So we did the Mishnah on Samach Chesem and Beis on the bottom, which listed various things that when you sell a field, you sell a sada, some things are included and some things are not included. And basically, the Gemara is going to go through every single one of those things and define its terms and expound on it. So the very first thing that the Mishnah says was, if you sell a field, you sell the stones that are needed for it are sold along with the field. So the Gemara, Samach Tesam at Aleph at the top, first line, it says, Maya Vanim Shein Letzorka. What are these stones that are needed for it, for the field? What is that referring to? So we're going to have two understandings. So, Haka Targimo Avne de Ichpa. So there are certain stones that you put them down on your sheaves, to keep them down so that they don't get blown away in the wind. That's the first understanding. Ula Amar Avanim Hasiduros. Ula says Avanim Hasiduros, that they are put like Misudar, organized around your field as a border to the field. We just started, Steve, don't worry. So two understandings. What are stones that are for it? Either it's stones that are placed upon the sheaves so that they don't get blown away, or it's stones that are put around your field neatly as a border, as a fence for the field. Okay, but we had a brisa in the name of Rav Chia, avanim tziburos together. It says there clearly it's avanim that are tziburos together, that are piled together, and even though they're not put around the field very nicely, they're just sort of piled together. Those are also things that are sold with the field. Says the Gemara, no, tani siduros. Really, you should change the word. It's really referring to siduros. Really, it's referring to stones that are like a fence around the field, and therefore it's not a difficulty. Therefore, it's not difficult according to that opinion. Okay, so now we need a little bit of background. So the Rashbam tells us that there's a dispute later on, about 10 daf from now, between Rav Meir and the Chachamim, that when you sell a vineyard, so what gets sold with the vineyard? So according to Rav Meir, a vineyard is sold, and anything which is a tashmish of the vineyard, anything which is a usage of the vineyard, gets sold with the vineyard, and the Rabbanan argue. So basically, they have a general machlokas when you sell something, is what gets included with that? Its general usages, or no, only the thing itself. So now we're going to try to understand our Mishnah according to those two opinions, because they're going to have to understand our Mishnah too. Which things in our Mishnah are usages, which is going to be good for Rav Meir and not good for the Rabbanan, and which things might be good for the Rabbanan and not for Rav Meir. So the Gemara says, Hacha targimo avnei deichbal Rav Meir de mesachnan, afagav de lo machtan. But l'Rabbanan, it's hu de machtan. So now, Rav Meir holds that whatever is considered a usage of the field will be sold with the field. So these stones that hold down your produce, your sheaves, let's say they are not in your field. They're somewhere in the outskirts of your field, but they're ready to be used for your field. Says Rav Meir, even if they're not actually placed down on your produce, but rather they are, not even in your field, but they're ready to be used for your field, we can look at those right now as an essential part of your field. Steve, we're like 6 lines down from Samach Tes Amud Aleph. So that's all good for Rav Meir. But according to the Rabbanan, no, it's hu de machtan. The Rabbanan only say something which is really, really essential to your field. So if these stones are actually holding down your produce, so then those are specific to your field. They're not general things that are used, as a usage for your field, but it's much more specific. So the Rabbanan are always going to need a higher level, something which is much more unique to your field, much more common, much more, being used right now for your field in order to be sold with the field. So what about Ula the Amar, that when it said in the Mishnah, we're talking about stones that you need for your field. Ula said those are stones that are made for a fence around your field. So Ula the Amar Avanim Hasduros together. So now, according to Rav Meir, who has a much more broad definition of what's included in the field, it's okay if they're misaklan afagav lo sidron. If they're once again they're ready to be used as a fence, you just haven't put them up as a fence yet, that's already enough, because that's already considered a tashmish of your field. That's already considered a general, something which is used for your field. But according to the Rabbanan, you have to look at much more. It has to be right now helping you. So according to Rabbanan, it's only hu the sidron. If you actually put it up as a fence, so then when you sell a field, so that only then will those stones be considered litzorka, that they're needed for the field, and only then are they going to be sold. So once again, that's the first part of the mission about stones. Either it's referring to stones that are used to hold down your produce so it doesn't fly away in the wind, or it's stones that are used as a fence. Those are two opinions on what's considered stones that are essential for the field. That when you sell a field and you don't specify anything else, those kinds of stones that are going to be sold with your field. Okay, moving on to the next part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us if you have reeds, the es hakonim shebekeren shehein letzarka. You have reeds in your field that are reeds in your vineyard. I'm sorry, that are used for your vineyard. So what exactly does that mean? Says the Gemara, kanim ma'avidatayu. How are reeds going to help your vineyard? Amri de Rabbi Yanai, kanim hamechulakim shemamidim takas agafanim. Sounds like these kind of reeds are a little bit spread out, and they go and they hold up your vineyards. This way, the vineyards can be standing upright, and the clusters of grapes are much higher up. They'll be in the air, and they won't be just close to the ground, and they might get ruined by the ground. So basically, the reeds help the vineyard because they raise up the clusters of grapes, and therefore that's will prevent damage to the grapes. So now, Rav Meir once again says anything which is generally, considered as part of the usage of your field is included. According to the Rabbanan, it's has to be right now. You have to be right now essential to your field. You have to be using it right now. So according to Rav Meir, the mishapian afagad loy mukman. So according to Rav Meir, even if you smoothened out the reeds, even if you haven't actually placed them into the ground, that's already considered enough of a tashmish, of a usage of your field, that would be sold with the field. But according to the Rabbanan, it's hu de mukman. No, according to the Rabbanan, you actually have to place them into the ground, and they have to be right now actively helping you to be considered to be sold with your field. The next part of the Mishnah said that if there's produce as latua, which is mechuber lekarka, which is attached to the ground, such produce is going to be sold with the field. So it says the Gemara, afal gav dimatoi lemichtzad. This produce, even if it's machtoi lemichtzad, meaning the time came for you to reap the produce, and you would have thought that produce that's ready to be cut, you already view it as it's, one step out the door. It's already not considered part of the field anymore. Maybe part of the field is only produce that's right now really in its essential stages of growth. But if it's already ready to be reaped, so then maybe you could already view it as it's like it's already been taken off, so to speak. And therefore you would have thought that maybe it's not included in your field. Says the Mishnah, even such produce, of course, regular produce, which is just attached to your field, it's mechuber lekarka, for sure that's sold. But even produce that's about to be cut off any day, any minute now, maybe you would have thought that's not considered part of your field. Kamashmal on the Mishnah teaches us that it's still considered part of your field. Next case in the Mishnah was as chitzas hakanim shepechusa mibeis rova. So our chitzas hakanim was this pile of reeds that, as long as it is less than the amount that we refer to as a base rova, I think it's about 10.5 amos by 10.5 amos, and because we'll see, but if it's more than that, it's going to have its own identity. And we know already that when you sell something, so things that are sort of nullified to that are sold with it. But if you have your own identity and you have your own name for yourself, then you have to then you will not be sold with the field. So chitas hakanim shepechusa mibeis rova, the afal gav de alimi. Even if these, how's translated there alimi, Steve? Even though if these reeds are very big and very strong, even if they're very strong, And you would have thought that because they're very strong, therefore it's going to have its own identity. It's going to be it's going to have its own name for itself, and it won't be nullified to the field. But Kamashmalan, even such strong reeds, as long as it's less than a base rova amount, that will be sold with the field. Then we had this shomira. What's our translation of shomira? The watchman's hut, right? The watchman's hut, she'ena suya b'tit, as long as it's not made with plaster, meaning it's not really attached to the ground. So, says the Gemara, afagav lo kviya ba'ara. It's not fully stationed in the ground. Since you would have thought if it's not fully stationed in the ground, maybe it's enough to be its own identity. It's known the watchman's hut. But says the Mishnah that no, as long as it's not stationary in the ground, so and it's not really plastered in, so then it's not going to have its own identity, and then it will be sold with the field. Okay. One second. Yeah. Okay. Next case. We had a carob tree and a sycamore tree. The carob tree that wasn't grafted, and the sycamore tree that was still very young. Right? That's a charuv she'ena murkav, that's a basul shikma. So says the Gemara the same thing. Afal gav delim, even though they're very big and they're very strong, you'd have thought that would be enough to give it its own name, its own identity, that when you sell a sada, these things would not be included. Maybe you'd have to specify, I'm selling you a field and this big sycamore trees. I guess if you ever like the redwoods, right? You're gonna sell a field with some huge redwoods tree there, no?
Why doesn't the Gemara pick out these two trees compared to like a cherry tree?
Well, that's a good question. Why these two trees? Yeah, I don't know. The Rashbam said earlier that the rest of the trees are included in the field. Only these two. Yeah, good question. Okay, fine. Continuing. Okay, so now we're going to go the inverse, the exact, right? The Mishnah goes through what's not going to be sold. What's not sold are the stones that are not needed for your field. I guess one could ask, once you told me that only stones that are needed for my field are sold, why do you have to specify stones that are not needed for your field are not sold? Yeah, so I don't know. But now back to Rav Meir and then the Rabbanan. Rav Meir is going to say, so what's considered not needed for your field? That even for Rav Meir, who has such an expansive definition of what's going to be included in your sale, so what cases are going to be that even he'll agree that it's not sold? Rav Meir, Delo Masaknan, these aren't even stones that we see right now are ready to be used either to hold down your produce or to be used as a fence, just random stones. The Rabbanon, even if they're set and they're ready to go to be used for your field, but until you actually place them down on your produce, they'll be considered anal etzorka. They'll be not a necessity to your field right now, and therefore they're not going to be sold. Ula de Amar, and according to Ula says Avadim Masdros together. Ula says that the stones are referring to stones that are made into a fence around your field. So according to Rav Meir, you haven't even prepared. There are stones that have not even been prepared to be used as a fence. And l'Rabbanan, they're like sidron. According to Rabbanan, they're prepared. Maybe you shaped all the stones in one, in one shape and in one size. But until you actually put them down to surround your fence, that's not considered enough to be considered a necessity. And therefore, that's considered stones that are not necessary for your field. And therefore, they are not going to be sold. Okay, so same thing. Once again, you could ask the same question. Once we know that only reeds that hold up your grapes are a necessity, what's veloas sakanim shebekayim she'enan letzorka? So now, according to Rav Meir, Deloy Meshapin, you haven't even smoothened them out. Even Rav Meir holds that's not included in your field, and the Rabbanon, you smoothen them out already. However, Deloy Mukman, you haven't actually placed them. You haven't actually placed them in your vineyard. You haven't actually, held up the cluster of grapes with them, and therefore they're not a necessity. Therefore, they are not sold with your field. Same thing. Below is a tvua, hatlushim in a karka, and not produce which is removed, which is literally plucked from the earth, meaning it's detached. So once again, that should be pretty obvious because it's not attached to the ground. Says the Gemara of Afal Gav, the tzricha la'ara. certain produce that the tzricha la'ara, you need it for your land. Why would you need it for your land? Says the Rashbam, you want to spread it out in your field after you've reaped it to let the wind a little bit blow and dry it out. So even though you still need this thing on your field, you still need the produce on your field. So maybe you'd have thought it's still really part of the field. But that the Mishnah says that no, the litmus test is it attached or detached? If it's detached from the field, even if you're not done yet with your whole process, that's still going to be considered not sold with your sada, with your field. Okay. And this whole stash of reeds that are not the size of a beis rova, that are the size of a beis rova, they already are very significant. It's enough space that you don't view it as part of your field anymore. It has its own, it's like a reed area. That's where my reed area is. Yeah, 10 amos, I don't know, 15, 16 feet of a whole stash of reeds. So that's not considered part of your field. The afal gav de katini. And the novelty is, even if they're katina, they're very, very thin. And maybe since they're very thin, they don't have their own significance. Says the Mishnah, no. Even if they're very thin, if you have enough of them, look at the quantity and not the quality. You look at the quantity, so as long as they take up a space of a beis rova, whatever it is, 15, 18 feet, so then that's enough already to be considered its own identity. When you look at a field and you see this whole 10.5 by 10.5 amos full of reeds, you don't view that as part of your field. Rather, you view it as something exterior, and therefore it's not going to be sold with your field. Says Rabbi, this is not a special halacha by reeds. This is in general, even in aruga ketana shel basamim, a whole row of good smelling spices that are growing in your field. So if it has its own name, so meaning you have, let's say, you have a field, and you have the beautiful smelling rows and rows of I don't know, what's an example of good smelling spices? I don't know. Lavender. So then that has its own name. That's the lavender area. So that, yeah. What is that? Mint. Right? So that when I'm selling you a sada, you're only referring to the stuff maybe that hasn't been cultivated yet, or maybe the general field area. But I'm not talking about the mint area, my special mint, my good spice smelling rows of things that I'm not selling. Because it has its own name. It's not part. You don't say, you call it its own name. That's the mint area. Amarav Papa, Behu de Karala, Brother de Planya. And that's an example of that is when you call it Vrada de Planya. That's what you call this row of good smelling, Aruka Sabosim. They call it a Vrada de Planya. Rather, they translate as what a violet. What do they do?
Was the
so-and-so's roses.
So-and-so roses, yeah. So they have good smelling roses. So when people refer to it, when they say field, they don't mean the roses. They refer to the area of your field as, so's and so's roses, the Moravitz roses. So if the Moravitz sell a field, unless they specify the Moravitz rose area, the Moravitz rose garden, so then that would not be included. That would not be included in the field. Okay. Below Hashomira Hasuya Betit. And we're not selling this watchman's hut that is plastered onto the ground. So if it's plastered to the ground, so then it'll be sold with it. Right. If it's not plastered, then it is sold. If it is plastered, then it's not sold. So below Hashomira Hasuya Betit. This is plastered to the ground. That's the novelty. It's attached to the ground, and you'd have thought whatever's attached to the ground is going to be sold. So, but says the Gemara, no. Why? This is a watchman's hut. This is not part of your field. This is something else. So therefore, it has its own identity. It has its own significance, and therefore, it's not going to be sold. Okay. By Rabbi Elazar Malvenos. So now we're going to get a little bit sidetracked here, going back to houses, because basically the Rashbam explains why we're getting sidetracked over here. Our Mishnah differentiated between things that are attached to the ground, that are plastered with tit, with plaster and things that are not attached to the ground. So now we're going to have a few questions that follow that difference. Ba'i Rabbi Elazar, Malvenos shel psachim mahu. So you have it sounds like a doorway. Make this doorway to your house. So, of course, if it's attached with plaster to your house, of course it's sold with your house. It's attached. You put up this doorway, but you put it on pegs. You don't put it up with plaster. Do you view it as really it's part of the house? Or do you say that no, it's not attached with plaster, it's not strongly attached to the house, so then it's not sold with the house? So that the Gemara says, take it, we don't know. Same thing, you have windows, you put a certain door frame on your window, a nice door, a nice window frame. So alma, do we say that you put it just for beauty? Hu davidi. Or do you say no? Once it's attached, and it's part of the house. So if it's just a adornment of the house, then it's not going to be sold with the house. It's just an adornment. But it's attached to the house. If it's attached to the house, maybe whatever's attached to the house will be sold with the house, even if it's an adornment to the house and not have its own identity. Teiku, one more. By Revirmia, Melvena Shalkari Amita. So now you have these things that you put under a bed. You have a bed, and there's these wooden pegs, wooden little stoppers, I guess, that you put like we have nowadays. You put on the bottom of chairs to not scratch the floor. So too here, Malveno Shakari Amita, you put under the legs of the bed. Why? So that they shouldn't ruin the ground. Sorry, that they shouldn't get ruined in the ground. Back then the ground was right. It was dirt, so they're going to go into the ground. Then they can get ruined. So you put them into these wooden slots. So now, is that sold with the bed or not? So, if it travels with it, if it literally moves with it, that's strongly attached to the bed. So for sure, it's sold with the bed. Let's say they're removable. They don't always travel with the bed. You didn't attach it so strongly. So same thing. Is that considered part of the bed or not? And the Gemara says once again, Teiku, we don't know. It's a good question.
So that's the bed rises.
The bed rises, right. Yeah. Okay. Back to our scheduled programming. So the Mishnah said a very interesting thing. The Mishnah said that these two trees, Velos Achar Vamurcha, Velos Stana Shekma, one is a young tree, a carob tree that's not grafted, and a sycamore tree that's very young, are not included in the sale of a field. So turning the page, Samach Tesam base. So the Gemara says very interestingly, if it's going to find a scriptural source for this, sounds like Jared's question is very valid, right? What's special about these two trees? Why are these two trees specified? So the Gemara asks the same thing, like Minan immediately, what's the source for this? So the Rashbam explains a little bit that what it's saying is, we know that these things are not included in the field. However, since they're not included in the field, even if you were to say, kol masha b'soga, whatever is included in my field, they're still not sold as part of the field. Because these two fields apparently are really considered like their own little field. It's like a mini field inside of a field, right? So even if you were to write, I'm selling my field and whatever's included, these still wouldn't be included. It must be they're so unique and they're so separate that they don't become nullified to the field and they're not sold. Says the Gemara, Mirani Mili, Amar Rav Amar Rav, Damar Kra. So we know Avram Ravinu, spent a long time spent a long time negotiating with Ephron to go bury his wife. His wife died, Sarah died, and he needed a place to bury her. There's a whole section of the Torah that talks about the negotiation. There are those commentators that view that actually as the 10 tests Avram Avinu had. So everyone thinks that it ends by Yitzchak Avinu. That was the final test. But there are those commentators that say no, the negotiating with Ephron was also its own unique test. Okay, Vayakum Sada Ephron Asher b'Machpelah. So the whole pasuk reads, Vayakum Sada Ephron Asher b'Machpelah, Asher lifnei Mamre Asada. So he got everything. He got the field that was Ephron's, and Hasada. So we got like literally the cave area where we're going to bury Sarah, and the field that's there, and v'chol ha'etz asher b'sada, and any tree that's included in the sada, asher b'chol gvulo saviv. So says the Gemara, Misha tzarich legvul saviv, yatzu elu she'ein tzrichin legvul saviv. So basically, when Avraham Avinu bought this, he didn't just buy, the grave. He bought the whole area of land, and he bought all the trees that are inside of there also. Now, the part of the pasuk says, "Asher b'chol gvulo," everything which is in its borders. So that means that there are certain trees that are small, that if you don't make a boundary around them, people might not know whose trees they are, right? So any trees that need a boundary, those are also included. Those are small little bushes on the edge that you're not sure whose they belong to. The Rashbam says that it's very common to someone to make a mistake and say, no, those belong to me, they don't belong to you. But a charuv hamurka, a grafted carob tree or a sycamore tree, they're so big and they're so chashuv, they're so significant that everyone knows whose they are. I mean, if you sell a field, everyone knows whose field the sycamore tree is in. There's no confusion there. So they don't need their own border. So once again, the Torah tells us, "V'yacham stay Ephron asher b'machpelah." Then the end of the pasuk says, "V'chol ha'eit asher b'sada asher b'chol gvulo saviv." What does that mean? It means misha tzarich legvul saviv, the trees that are included that need a border because they're commonly mistaken. So those things would be included. Those things, but yatzu elu, however, she'ein tzrichin legvul saviv. But these certain big trees that have their own significance, so those things don't need their own border, because therefore they're not included in the field. So meaning Avraham Avinu only bought the field and all the small little trees that are maybe on the edges that we don't know there might be confusion who they belong to. But if you have these huge, very important chashava trees that were there in Hebron, so those were not sold. So what do you see? So it's not talking about a sycamore tree or a carob tree, but it's just pointing out that any trees that are so significant, whether they're large, whether maybe society views them as very important, so those have their own identity. And you see from the sale of Ephron to Avraham Avinu that they were not included in that sale. Only the other trees, or any less significant tree, only those are included in the sale.
No Google Earth or a Street View where you could say,
right
here, there's the big sycamore tree.
Correct. So obviously, if you specify, I want your field and the sycamore tree, that's one thing. But if you don't specify it, so then they're too important and they have their own identity. And until you can imagine like there's a field with something very rare, as a certain plant that only grows in this area because of the climate, and it's a whole tourist attraction that they're coming to your backyard, to the left corner of your backyard, to go and observe this plant or this tree. So just because you sell a field, right? But if you want to sell that area too, you got to specify it, because why would you give that up? That's very important to you. So things that are that important to you, you have to specify that you're selling it. If not, we're not going to assume that you'd give it up. Amar of Misharsha, very interesting. Mikan limitzarim min haTorah. He learns out another thing from this pasuk. He says that when you acquire a field, you also acquire the actual boundaries of the field. Meaning they used to make these boundaries that are a little bit uneven with the field. I think it's Rashbam like way back somewhere on that they used to make these boundaries that were a little bit higher, a little bit lower. So when you buy a field, you don't only buy the field itself, but you even buy that boundary, that area that was, separating from you to the other areas. So it was maybe a little bit lower than you, a little bit higher than you, but it was supposed to be there to delineate between you and your neighbor. So we see from here that he acquired the field, and he acquired the whole area around the field. Asher b'chol gvulo saviv, that whole border around it also. So here is the source that when you acquire a field, you also acquire that area, the boundary that's around the field. Yeah. Okay, fine. That's an interesting halacha learned out of Avram Avinu. Amar Bihuda. Ha'iman demazvin ara lechavre. So continuing, how you specify things and how you verbalize things and what's included. So Amar Bihuda, Ha'iman demazvin ara lechavre. Someone sells land to his friend. Sarich lemichtavle. I have to write kanilach diklin v'ta'olin v'hutzin v'tzitzin. All different kinds of palm trees. Diklin are fully grown palm trees. Ta'olin are younger palm trees. Hutzin and Vitzitzin are different species of palm trees. You have to specify that. Says the Gemara, why would you have to specify that? If you sell a field and there's these palm trees inside, so they're not that significant. So of course they're included in your field. Says the Gemara, obviously, if you didn't write this in your document, of course they're still sold. So why am I wasting my ink? So afilu hachi shufra the shtaru. It's still a shufra. It's good for the shtar. It improves the shtar, because just in case someone's gonna be a dispute that's gonna come about, so it's gonna be phrased very clearly into the shtar. So this is an interesting thing, because once again it's already included, but yet and if a dispute came up, really you could always, it's on the buyer to really bring a proof. It's on the seller to bring a proof that he didn't sell his palm tree. But even so, there's an added benefit to specifying these things in your document, because it's better for the document. It'll be clear. It's mefurish. It's explicit. Okay, fine. Yeah. Amar lei. Okay, now a variety of different ways you can sell land and the trees. Amar lei. Ara vidikli. You're selling land and dikli and palm trees. So now, chazinan iisle dikli yahivle trey dikli vilesle zavinle trey dikli vimishavda parkle trey dikli. So now, if you say I'm selling you land and 2 palm trees, so now you owe the guy the land you just sold and 2 other palm trees. The Rishon points out that some say what it means is your land and only 2 trees inside of your land, but the Rishon doesn't like that, because land already includes all the trees inside. So it must be when you phrase land and palm trees, you mean land. And now what's the minimal amount of a palm trees? Trees is 2. So now you owe him 2 other palm trees. So now if you have them, they're his. If you don't have them, well, go get them and sell them to him. So it says you have to be trustworthy. If you promise him that, then you have to keep your word. So if they're tied up in a lien, you owe somebody money and they have a lien on those trees. So then go figure out your lien and get this buyer his palm trees. So that's aravidically, land and palm trees. What about arabidically? So this is now ara. That's literally, I guess it means ara in your palm trees. So chazina, we look. Ispadically, yahivlei. So if you have the palm trees, so then if your field has palm trees, so that's what you meant, the field with the palm trees. So you own 100 fields, you go find the field that has the palm trees, that's the one that's sold. If you sell them the field with the palm trees and there's no palm trees, you love mekaktosu. So then it's called mekaktos, it's a nullified sale. I promised you a car and you showed up and I gave you a chair. So hold on, I didn't come to Toyota to get a check, I to get a car. That's mekaktos. The guy promised me a land with palm trees. I want to be able to be the lulav seller in town, and now I'm not able to. So that's mekaktos, so that he gets his money back, and the sale is null and void. Okay, third way to phrase something. Ara be dikli, land that is fitting to grow palm trees. So now ara be dikli, so lesle dikli, but he means the chazil dikli ka'amrle. He means that it's fitting. It doesn't have palm trees on it. It's fitting to grow palm trees. So now, okay, so that's fine. So that's that. So now, Amarle, fourth way to phrase something. Amarle, lebar midik leplanya. So now, I'm selling you my land except for the palm tree. So what does that mean? Well, chazina, dikla tavahu. If it's like a really good tree, obviously he meant to leave it over for himself. So then, shiure shaireha, he left it over. And e dikla bishahu, but if it's not a good palm tree, so then kol shekain hana. What does that mean?
Superior palm.
Right.
Then those palms those superior to it are certainly excluded from the sales.
Yeah, certainly. So meaning if you say I'm selling you the
inferior, if seriously.
Everything except for the palm tree, right? So if it's a beautiful palm tree, for sure you're going to keep it.
The other palms are in the field are sold, but if it's an inferior palm, then those palms that are superior to it are certainly excluded from the sale. In such a case, we interpret the seller's statement to mean that he's was not selling even this inferior palm.
Right.
Therefore, sounds like a.
So meaning if you're going to sell, then I'm not selling you the bad palm trees.
Yeah.
Everything else everything that's inferior to that.
Well, if I'm gonna
is not going to be sold. Yeah. Okay. So kolshke and hanach that are much better than them, then you're for sure keeping for yourself. Because we interpret it to mean even that. What it means is even that bad palm tree, that not good palm tree, I'm still keeping for myself. Kol shekain, the ones that are better than it. So now, basically, right. So it's interesting. I mean, if you look at a field, he has a beautiful palm tree now. He has one beautiful palm tree and 100 rotten palm trees. And he says, I'm selling you the field, but not the palm tree. So what happens? He means obviously you look at his 100 palm trees, the beautiful one he keeps for himself, and the other 99 or the other 100 are sold to you. But if he only has, let's say, a lot of inferior palm trees, so then what he's saying is I'm keeping the inferior ones for me, and for sure the ones that are better than it, I'm for sure keeping for me. Okay. Amar le lebar me'ilani. He says now, I'm selling you everything except for my tree. So now, one sec, lebar me'ilani. Without the trees, right? So now, isle ilani, lebar me'ilani. Oh, this is a whole 1 second. Yeah. So if the seller tells the buyer, I'm selling you everything except for the tree. So now we see if he has, I guess he points at this tree, he specifies a tree. 1 second.
No, without its trees.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if he sells you land except for the trees, so now isla ilane. So then lebar milani, he sold you everything except for the trees. Now, even though he said ilani, so let's say right, there's one kind of tree that refers to olive trees, fig trees, apple trees. Those are all called trees. But now let's say he has palm trees, but you only said ilani. You didn't say dikli. Dikli means palm tree. So same thing. Islay dikli, lebarmi dikli. Even though you said ilani, but if you only have palm trees, then we interpret it to mean, even though you only said general trees, but if what you have are palm trees, you're selling land except for the palm tree. Islay dikli, lebarmi dikli. Islay gufani. If you have vines, so then you're selling, even though you only said ilani, trees, but if the tree that you have is a vine, so then you're selling your land except for the vines. Gufani lebar mi gufani. Now, what if you say I'm selling you land except for trees, and you have regular trees, fig trees, olive trees, date trees, and you also have vines? So now what happens? Ilani vigufani. If you have both of those, then it's only lebar me ilani. We only understand you to mean you're selling your field except for your other trees. You don't mean but the gufani would be included in the sale. So basically, the Gemara is going through when you say the word ilani, I'm selling you land except for ilani. What's ilani referring to? So if all you have are regular olive trees, grape trees, fig trees, then you're selling land except for those trees. But now you just said trees, but now there are different kinds of trees, date palm trees, and there are vineyards and things like that. So what did you mean? So if you have regular trees and you also have date palm trees, or you have regular trees and you have a vineyard, then it's easy. All you're excluding are the other trees, but it's still included as your vineyard and your date palm trees. So now what if you only have a vineyard and you have palm trees. But you said I'm selling you land except for ilani. So that the Gemara says it must be you're only excluding the gufani. You're only excluding the vineyard. Why? I guess that's more generally referred to as ilani. Yeah, that's what the Rashbam says. Vineyard, when you're comparing a vineyard to a date palm tree, to a palm tree, so then the vineyard's called ilani. They're referred to as the tree. Yeah, I guess date palm trees stand out more, right? So you look at the more regular, so if someone said, I have these trees, and they also have a vineyard, so then you wouldn't refer to the vineyard as the trees. You refer to it as gufani from the word geffen, like geffen, right? But if you just have trees in a vineyard, regular trees, then regular tree means regular tree. But now if you only have a vineyard and you have date palm trees, so compared to the big palm trees, vineyards are referred to as regular trees, and therefore you would sell your land and the palm trees, except for the vineyard that you would keep to yourself. Okay, I guess we can begin for a minute. The next part. So Amar Rav says. So we're going back to trees. That you said you're selling your land except for trees. So now, what's considered a tree? Does a tree have to have a certain amount of strength to be considered a tree? Is any little thing that grows from the ground that's taller than a centimeter considered a tree? What's a tree? So how would you know? How do you test what's a tree or not? So says Rav, I'll tell you. Amar Rav, kol she'olon lo b'chevel, so have a shear. Anything which you have to climb up. So when you say I'm selling my land except for the tree, so that's how you know. If it's big enough that you need to climb up it, that you have to have a rope to climb up. So then you can't just 3 steps and then you're on top of the tree already. That's considered a tree. However, however, a tree that's so small that you can just step 2 steps on it and you don't need any kind of rope to get to the top of it, that's not really considered a tree. Maybe we'll call it like a little bushel or something. And it's not considered like a nice tree. That's not a tree that's sold. The Rashbam points out that we're going to say later that obviously we're referring to a palm tree, because a palm tree is very, very tall, and the fruits of the palm tree grow, the date palms grow on the top. So that's what it's referring to. So anything that needs a rope to get to the top of it is going to be considered a tree. And when you say I'm selling you land except for the tree, that's what it's referring to. Other little bushels, that's not what we refer to when we say trees. Vidayane Gola, on to the next Amud. Vidayane Gola Amri Kol Sheha'ol Kosher. You have an ox going with the yoke of the ox is on the ox, and it goes by the tree and it crushes it. So Kol Sheha'ol Kosher Lo Havishir. When you said I'm selling you my land except for the tree, you weren't referring to the little dwinky things that just get knocked over and smushed when an ox walks by. Rather, Kol She'ena Ol Kosher Havishir. Only things that are really very strong, a tree that can really stand through the yoke of an ox coming through, that's what you refer to when you said tree. It says the Gemara, and don't think that the Rav and the Dayani Gola are arguing. They're just speaking about 2 different trees. They're speaking about Velo Pligi, Ha B'dikli, and Ha B'ilani. A decal tree is very, very tall, and the fruits grow on the top. So that's what you have in your field, and you say I'm selling my field except for the palm tree, so it's got to be a palm tree that you need a rope to get to the top of it, because that's really the date palm tree. If it's a little thing that happens to grow, that's not considered ilani, and that's not something which you would save for yourself. That's not included. That's not going to be excluded. However, by a regular tree, so when you say I'm selling land except for a regular tree, so then it depends. Can this tree withstand an ox coming by with a yoke of the ox on it, and it hits it? Does it fall over? Or does it not fall over? If it falls over, so then that's not called really ilani. Something much smaller. If it does not fall over and it withstands it, so that's the tree that you want to withhold for yourself. Okay.